Well, good morning. Welcome to the Tuesday Q&A. It is 11:16, and one thing we are not going to talk about today is the coronavirus. So it's gotten exactly one mention. We would love for you to join us later today at 3 o'clock here on Facebook Live as we talk about what Westway's plan is, our multi-phase, four-phase plan of what we're calling the regathering here. So we are. So this will be. So I'm not going to say the C word. We're not going to talk about that other thing until later today. So if you want some kind of update from us on what we're doing with that, we want you to come back today at 3 o'clock and learn more, and then we'll have some updates on that.
Yep. Jim Miller, one of our elders, is going to be joining John to talk about that. And I think you will be encouraged by what you hear. And we've put a lot of thought, a lot of prayer, and a lot of discussion into this. And so make sure you join us at 3.
Yeah. So today, or this past Sunday, we've been continuing this series through 2 Timothy now, Letters to a Pastor. And this chapter 2 in 2 Timothy, the message was called Embrace the Suck. So you hinted at something yesterday in our staff meeting when we were talking about it. So Joe, what was your first thought when you heard that the title of the message was "Embrace the Suck"? I want you to be honest. What was your first thought when you heard the message title?
You know, I have an insight in what the message title is going to be, because obviously I'm here in the office, but I also my son usually does a recording of it, and he's the one that came to me and told me what the name of the message was. And at that moment, I thought, ooh, that's going to get people's attention.
Yeah.
and I wondered, and I think that's exactly why the name of the message was it was, is because we want you to ask questions about what do you mean by that. We want to grab your attention.
Yeah, exactly.
And it did. It caught my attention. Yeah. And so I was very pleased to see where that phrase came from within the message.
Yeah. But you were a little perplexed at first.
At first I
shocked.
I really was.
Good.
Yeah.
That's what I was going for. So I said in the message, that phrase was sort of an unofficial motto for U.S. Special Forces of how to get through hard times. And I was first introduced. I don't remember when I was first introduced to that phrase, but that phrase kind of entered like my vernacular several years ago. This was 2013. I've talked about this a number of times. We took some high school students to the Appalachians and hiked for 5 days. Carried everything in. Every day was a hike to our new campsite. We had no idea what the campsite was going to look like when we got there. It was basically like, okay, so we're here on this map and we want to go here, and we don't know what we're going to get when we get here, but we're just going to do this. And it was hard. It was physically, I would say certainly physically, the most difficult thing that I've ever done. Even up to this point, it was very challenging. And
you've run in some tough races.
Yeah, and it was very much like somewhere in that conversation, that phrase "embrace the suck" came up. And then it's funny, like when we got back from that trip, John has a backpack, and it has like the Velcro on it, and he ordered a patch that just says "embrace the suck." So that's been kind of our little fun phrase around our house. And I really think and thought, as I was reading through 2 Timothy, so much of this, like Paul is just presenting these realities and these hardships, and just telling Timothy, and also telling us, because now we're reading it,
Yeah.
about what the consequences are of the Christian life.
Mm-hmm.
And once that's been communicated, I feel like we have a couple choices what we can do,
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
we can respond and how we can react.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and a lot of times he uses three examples within that first part of chapter 2. He uses a soldier, and he uses the athlete, and he uses
Farmer.
the farmer. Yeah.
You were getting there.
I was, yeah. And I've had the opportunity, I guess, of being involved in each of those areas. I grew up on a farm. I understand what hard work is all about because of that. I was an athlete, sort of, I guess, and I know what it means to put forth extra effort in order to improve as an athlete. I spent 10 and a half years in the Navy Reserves as a CB in the construction battalion, and actually was a military instructor for over half of that time, training people to be ready to go into battle as a military instructor. And we often talked about, we train over and over and over and over and over. We do the same thing over and over and over and over so that we don't have to think about it in the heat of the moment.
Yeah.
And really, that's kind of what Paul is talking about here. The sacrifice that you make in preparation for the farmer. He plants the seed not knowing whether it's going to come up or not. He has to trust God to do that. The athlete puts in hours and hours and hours of mundane training so that they can reach the goal,
right,
and be ready when the hardships come. And the same way for Christians. We really need to prepare ourselves for whatever it is that is going to come up. So I can relate to what Paul was saying there. And I think about Paul's history. And really it began with a lot of study under probably the best teacher of the time when it came to the law, Gamaliel. And how God was able to take Paul and get his attention on the road to Damascus and help him to understand what you've already been through is training you for what I need you for. And I think we all are in some sense similar to that.
Yeah, and he knew, I think with Paul in particular, like he knew exactly what he was getting into, especially on the persecution and the hardship side of what it looks like for a Christian, because he had been that persecutor. He had been that
person
on
the other side
who was creating hardship.
Yeah.
So he knew what he was getting into. I remember, I read books and articles on runners all the time, and one of the things I remember I read was talking about one of those ultra marathons, which is like 100-mile race. And I know that's crazy, but this person was talking, and she said you just have to decide at the front end that this is going to be the worst experience of my life.
Yeah,
like you have to decide that.
Yep.
So you're not caught off guard by it when it happens. To build that mental and emotional, I would say, the spiritual stamina. You have to embrace that. You have to embrace the suck of what that reality is going to look like.
Yeah. It makes me think of my son Shane when he was at CIY one year. CIY gives you envelopes. What do they call those envelopes? I forget what they call them. But anyway, you can't look inside the envelope. You can't take an envelope unless you agree to do whatever it says inside that envelope.
Right.
And his was run a marathon. He was not. He didn't run. He wasn't an athlete in high school or junior high. I think he may have went out for track in junior high once. It seems like, but he really wasn't. That wasn't his thing. That wasn't what he wanted to do. But he had determined, I'm going to do whatever it is God's asking me to do, and that's the way they challenge him at CIY. And the reason they do that is because they want them to understand this principle of embracing the suck, if you will.
Yeah.
And they're not easy things to do. And Shane, being Shane, didn't do a lot of training for that marathon. He did some. He ran some, but not like you do. and it was interesting to watch. He had made the decision, I'm going to finish. I know it's not going to be easy. I'm going to finish. And he did the whole marathon. And actually, I think he placed first in his age division.
Wow.
And one of his best friends, Andrew, would run with him at certain sections. He'd run a ways, and then he'd go back and get his vehicle, and then go ahead and then pick up again and encourage him. And I think God does the same thing for us, and I think Paul was doing the same thing for Timothy in this letter.
Yeah, and that's that very first verse from chapter 2. Timothy, my dear son, be strong through the grace that God gives you. So a lot of times we think that in order for us to make it through the hard times, we have to do this. We have to resolve.
Yeah.
Right. We have to, kind of like what I said with the person who was talking about this ultra marathon. I have to decide that this is going to be the most difficult thing. So I have to do this. I have to stick through this. I have to grit my teeth and get this done and all these things. But that's not what Paul's advice to Timothy is. Paul's advice to Timothy is for Timothy to be strong to use the strength that God gave him through Christ Jesus. So for us as Christians, as we think about enduring hardships and difficult circumstances and situations in our lives, the goal and the fix is not for us to resolve to do better.
Right.
The task and the challenge for us as Christians is to be strong through what God has given us.
Yes.
Because that's we go to Philippians 4:13, right? If you're a Christian for more than a second and a half, you've heard someone misuse that text. Sorry. I have a bias against that.
Yeah. Or if you've watched a sports event.
Yeah. We've seen an athlete. You've seen them misuse that text. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. So that strength comes from what God has done,
through
what
Christ.
Jesus has done.
Yeah.
And that's why when we look at these examples of the soldier, the athlete, and the farmer, ultimately what I said on Sunday is ultimately they have something to do with Jesus. So the soldier is telling us something about Jesus. The athlete is telling us something about Jesus. The farmer is telling us something about Jesus. So we don't focus on those examples because they're ends in and of themselves. We're focusing on them because they tell us something about Jesus.
Yeah. The soldier was, don't get distracted by your personal things.
Yeah.
So that you can focus on your commander. Well, who's our commander? That's Christ.
Can you think of an example when Jesus acted in the way where he was not distracted? He did not get tied up in the affairs of civilian life, so he was not distracted.
Oh, man. Well, I would say there's a number of them that come to my mind, but I like the story of the little guy, Zacchaeus. Jesus could have easily thought, I'm not going to this guy's house because society looks down on him.
Okay.
They hate him. They don't like him. And I'm not supposed to, as a Jew, hang out with sinners. That would be the distraction of the civilian world. But Jesus said, I know that God loved me and sent me to love people and to bring that love to them. And so I'm going to go to supper with this little guy and hang out with the sinners that he hangs out with.
Right.
And so that would be one example.
Yeah. So it's important just to understand that these examples are all about pointing to Jesus. So what do they tell us about Jesus? How do they say things about Jesus? Because it's ultimately about Jesus, which is why in verse 8 he says, always remember that Jesus Christ, a descendant of King David, was raised from the dead. This is the good news that I preach. And then Paul tells us, and that's why I'm in jail.
Yeah.
I'm in jail because I have been sharing this good news, and that did not catch Paul off guard. It didn't catch him by surprise when that happened.
Right.
It was just a consequence, and like I don't have the quote, so I'm not going to try it. But one of the things I said on Sunday was talking about how we don't need to be encouraged that our hardship and reality is going to be over. We need to be enamored with Jesus and recognize that Jesus is here in the midst of this hardship.
Yeah.
So I mean, this goes back. This is old school Westway. Well, old school Westway for me. But one of the very first sermon series we talked about was embracing the brutal realities.
Mm-hmm.
And now I guess I wish I would have thought about this on Sunday. But embracing the brutal realities, embracing the brutal realities, acknowledging their truth, acknowledging that they're happening, but never giving up hope that we were going to make it through.
Yeah.
So embracing the brutal realities, embracing the suck, requires us to recognize that Jesus is with us in the midst of this. And it's not about when this is going to be over and when it's not going to be over. It's about enduring with the strength that God gives us through Christ Jesus.
Yeah. And that's it. He's the one that gives us the strength to get through it. He's the one that prepares us for the moment.
Yeah.
And so we just have to say, okay.
Yeah. And acknowledge that he is with us.
Yeah.
In the midst of this. And that's where I like this trustworthy saying comes in. If we die with him, we'll live with him. If we endure hardship, we'll reign with him. If we deny him, he'll deny us. If we're unfaithful, he remains faithful because he cannot deny who he is. He can't be untrue to himself.
Yeah.
And I think that's just really powerful for us as we think about what it looks like to embrace the suck, to embrace the hardships and the realities of our lives, is remember that Christ is there, Christ is with us. And it's not in vain. I talked about that. The article I read about Ranger School, where the guy said something like, is this just a suck fest, or are we trying to teach people something?
Yeah.
And I think that's all mindset for us as we think about the hardships and the realities that we face in our everyday lives. Is this just does this just suck? Or is it possible that I can learn something about who God is, about who I am, what my role is in the midst of this?
It's interesting how many people I have talked to that have used those types of words and shared, because I'm the positive one in our house, and I'm looking for that positive, and so I'm asking people, what are you seeing God doing?
Yeah.
And oftentimes they know that that's the way I am, and so they share those things with me anyway. And how many people have come up to me and said, but I saw this, and this is showing me this. And they're recognizing that God is at work in all of this.
Yeah, when I was driving home, I don't even know what day it is today. Actually, it's Tuesday because this is the Tuesday Q&A. That's my only cue. But I was driving home just one evening last week, and just really in a moment of praising God for the way that he is. He's grinding on me right now. And I don't mean that in an accusatory way.
Right.
But man, there are so many times over the past 8 weeks as I've evaluated what's happening in my life, as I've evaluated my own situation and circumstance, and just reading through Scripture and being challenged and moved by it. God is just grinding on me right now, and it used to be that I really hated that. That I didn't want that. I didn't want him to like I didn't want him to grind me. I didn't want him to depress me. I didn't want him to do all of those things. But the reality of it is that's where growth happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you were speaking Sunday morning, the passage from James came to mind to me, and I think of, well, I'll just read it. First, James chapter 1, verse 2. Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. Oh. When we can come to that point where the troubles aren't scary, mm-hmm. and we even almost look forward to them, mm-hmm. then I think we're getting to this point where we can consider them as an opportunity rather than a struggle.
And that requires a lot of maturity. And that is not me saying, oh, look how mature I am because I can recognize that God is grinding on me. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that requires a lot of maturity to be able to recognize that despite this, whatever our situations and circumstances are that we are dealing with, like God can still do work in the midst of that. And that was where we talked about, even though Paul was in chains, mm-hmm. the gospel's not.
Right.
So God, and this is something I really just want to encourage you on as we think what it looks like for us to embrace the suck or endure hardship through God's grace, is that this it's good news for a reason, because it allows God to reveal to us the realities of who we are, which is mm-hmm. sinful, mm-hmm. but it also allows God to reveal the reality of who He is, which is a righteous judge, which is a kind and loving Father, which is all of the things. Like if we were to go back to the book of Ephesians and read through that chapter 1 like we did months and months and months ago.
It seems like a long time ago.
All of those identity markers of who Jesus is. Like in our hardships, mm-hmm. we know who we are, mm-hmm. and then we know who God is. And who God is the one that wants to reveal these things, not because he hates us or dislikes us, but because he loves us and he cares about us and he doesn't want us to suffer.
Yeah. Well, and he wants us to know that he's there with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. To me, that's where the joy comes from.
Yeah.
In that opportunity. The joy comes from not that I'm in the trial. Mm-hmm. I don't find joy in that. But what I do find joy is that I can see him helping me. I know that he's there walking with me. That's where the joy comes from. And oftentimes when I'm not in trials, I forget that.
Yeah.
And that's yuck. That's mundane. That's blah to me. But when I recognize him working in a situation, that's exciting to me.
Yeah.
And
if I go back to that week when we were hiking in the Appalachians, like there were so many good things that happened on that trip because we were in something together. Yeah. We were in this hardship together. We were all trying to figure out how to use the lensatic compass. We were all trying to figure out how to use the topographic map, and we were just in that together. And when things got hard and things got challenging, and as they frequently did on that trip, like we weren't alone. Yeah. We had one another, and it made enduring. When I say enduring the suck of that trip, it made it sound like it was an awful trip. It was really hard, but man, it was awesome. Mm-hmm. Like that's if I could go back and do. I want to be careful because I don't know if any of my former youth group kids are ever going to watch this, so I don't want anyone to feel slighted. But that was such an amazing trip, mm-hmm. and if that's, I'll say this, and I'll let myself off the hook. That's one of the things that if I could go back and do again, I would. Yeah. Because it was a really meaningful learning time, a time of growth, a time to understand like more about who I am. Mm-hmm. It was just a really good, and I wouldn't have got that if I didn't do that thing.
Isn't it interesting that we continue to say that word here, I am, who I am, but our identity comes
Right.
through him.
Right.
Yeah, and until we realize that our identity comes through him, we don't know who we are.
Right. Right.
And yeah, so I love the way Paul is encouraging Timothy.
Yeah.
In all of this, and Timothy has watched Paul and learned from Paul, and gone through struggles with Paul, and been prepared for the moment that God was placing him in. And Paul was saying, "Don't forget."
Yeah.
Yeah. There was another spot that I wanted to mention too in the quote. Oh, let's go back to Timothy. That's where it was. When you read it again in 13, if we are unfaithful, he remains unfaithful.
He remains faithful.
He remains, yeah. See, and I did that Sunday morning too when you read it. And we need to be careful how we read that, because that little 2-letter word if I put that in there, changes the whole meaning of that. He's not unfaithful. He is always faithful. And then he follows that up with, for he cannot deny who he is. We can. And when we do, that changes our identity in him. And he never changes. He is always faithful, because he cannot deny who he is.
Yeah, the thing that I wrote at some point in my Bible by that text is God's character is not swayed by our actions.
Yeah,
and
praise God.
That's just really amazing, because I think of how many times my character and my actions are swayed by what other people do, and are impacted and influenced by what other people do. And God just doesn't operate that way. He is not swayed by what we do.
Yeah, I can tell you, I've been struggling with this with this time, and praise God that he hasn't changed, because I can still be encouraged because of what he's doing.
Right.
And I just need to look around me and look at what he's doing.
Yeah.
And then the struggle part, it's okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
One of the other things that we wanted to share with you today is what we here at Westway Christian Church call faith promise.
Yeah.
So having been a part of the church for 20 plus years, being in different churches support their missionaries in different ways. Some churches just take a percentage out of their general fund giving and give that and support missionaries that way. But Westway does something called Faith Promise, where we have a special fund set up. So all of the money that Westway Christian Church gives to the missions that we support comes through Faith Promise. So if you, for instance, if someone wants to support the missions that Westway supports, when you give, if it's online, you would select Faith Promise, and then that money goes to our missions. Well, I shouldn't say every, because that's not true. In the past,
for many years,
in the past, March has been what Westway calls Faith Promise Month.
Yeah.
And what Faith Promise Month has typically looked like at Westway is we have some messages where we talk about missions, we talk about what our missionaries are doing. We have some different activities. Last year we did the food pack, which was awesome, and we were looking forward to doing that food pack again this year. And then at the end of March, at the end of Faith Promise Month, we ask our church body to pledge what they're going to give in the coming year from April through the next March to our missionaries. And then I'll go get a little technical, and then I'll jump right quickly out of that. Then that money is divided up among our missionaries. Some missionaries get this percentage, some missionaries get that percentage, and that all gets our missions team is kind of in charge of how that happens. So typically what happens is in March, people make a pledge to what they're going to give to Faith Promise for the next year. Well, we did not have Faith Promise Month this year.
Yeah.
Because of the C word that we're not going to mention, and we're going to talk about that later today. But we did not have Faith Promise Month, so we did not collect pledges this month. And here's the thing: even though we did not have Faith Promise Month, like Westway, your body, the body of Christ at Westway Christian Church, you guys have done something amazing.
Yeah.
You've still given to Faith Promise. Like, it's possible for us to not devote an entire month towards this and still receive finances to support our missionaries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we are grateful that you have continued in your faithfulness to supporting our missionaries.
Yeah.
I want to let you know that we had in the works a pretty great plan of what we were going to do for Faith Promise this year, in the way we were going to keep track of the finances and share that with our body on a consistent basis. And then this happened and it all blew up.
Yeah. Not that it won't be implemented yet.
Yeah. So that's kind of where we're at. So like everything else right now, what we want to do, first off, we wanted to tell you what Faith Promise was. So if you are a part of our church body and you didn't know what Faith Promise is, I think you know a little bit more. I think you now know that if you want money to specifically go to missionaries, you have to designate that as Faith Promise.
Can I mention something
Yes.
on that note too? I think what we have witnessed within this time frame, March and April, is the blessing that people have realized that God gives them in being able to do that.
Yeah.
Even more so in this time that we're going through, they're recognizing that blessing, and they didn't want to give that up. They didn't want to quit doing that.
Right.
Which is exciting to me.
Right.
It just says something about the health of the body.
Yeah, and we've talked about this a lot. It says that the way that you respond to the gospel of Jesus is not dependent on what we do.
Right.
And I think that's a really healthy place for us to be as a church. Like, you're not waiting for us to set up Faith Promise for you so that you know where your money, like, so you can participate in that. Like, you're just doing it. You are not waiting for us. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about that a number of times. We've talked about how if people are waiting for us to start certain ministries so that they can do, like, we want our body to really take ownership of what's happening here. And you are doing a fantastic job of that. And I'll also say that at some point in the future, we're not sure when, but at some point in the future, we'll have a time for pledging. We'll kind of roll out that plan that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And I guess that part's just on hold right now. But we want to encourage you not to give, but keep doing what you're doing, to keep giving.
Yeah.
Because as much as this health situation has impacted Westway Christian Church and other churches in our area and in the United States, our missionaries have been dramatically affected by this.
Yeah.
They've been dealing with these exact same things, and in some places and in some cases, they've had worse consequences of this than what we have.
Yeah.
So what we want to do is we wanted to let you know a little bit about what Faith Promise is, and we want to encourage you to keep giving, keep being generous to them. That money's getting to our missionaries.
Yep.
They're feeling loved and supported by our church body, and we just want to continue to do that. If you gave last year to Faith Promise, our pledges last year was right at $55,000. That's what Westway pledged to give to Faith Promise, and you gave a little bit more than that. It was like $55,803 or something like that.
Yeah.
So you gave more than what we pledged, which is fantastic. If you gave to Faith Promise last year, you should have received a letter and an email from us, from our missions team, thanking you for that giving. And then we're going to send out something later in the week, just kind of a general email out to everyone in our body, kind of recapping what this conversation is today. But we don't want to forget our missionaries. We don't want to forget to support them. So keep doing what you're doing. Keep financially supporting them, and more than that, keep supporting them with your prayers. Because they're working in really hard conditions compared to what we have here.
Yeah.
In the
And
US.
give God glory.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he continues to work through this,
Mm-hmm.
and that is part of it.
Right.
That is part of it.
Yep. So we want to thank you for watching today, and we want to invite you back today at 3:00, where we're going to give an update on what Westway's, we're calling it the regathering. We're going to give you an update on what our regathering plan is over the next month, as we consider how we're going to just come back together, and at the same time continue to do and participate in God's work, because we are not bound by the building. And I think we've said that probably 5 times now. You've demonstrated that. You've shown that you are hearing and you are grasping what we are calling you to as a body by serving God outside of this place. And we love that.
Yep.
Thanks for watching today. And we will see you, Jim Miller and I will see you back here at 3:00 today with an update. So have a super rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.
God bless.